Well, the party conference season is upon us. This weekend, it's the Liberal Democrats who'll be setting out their electoral stall. The Bournemouth get-together is the first in-person autumn conference in 4 years. And no doubt there'll be a chance to mark their recent by-election victories and signal their plans for next year's, maybe this year's, general election. Rodney Berman leads the Liberal Democrat group on Cardiff Council, former leader of the council indeed. Good morning, Rodney.
Good morning, Vaughan. How are you?
I'm okay. Interesting, isn't it, that you've had these great by-election results, and they are great, you know. Let's not take that away from you. And yet the support in the polls, the national support, the UK-wide support, that is, seems stubbornly stuck.
Well, we have gone up in the polls compared to where we were a couple of years ago. And I think what the electorate are increasingly recognising is that, the landscape is different in different parts of the country. And there are some parts of the country where they see Labour as the challengers to the Conservatives. But there are other parts of the country, such as where we won those spectacular by-election victories, where they certainly recognise that Labour could never win in those kind of areas. And that is why, we are seeing very encouraging signs of where people are switching to the Liberal Democrats. So we had those 4 fantastic by-election victories, sometimes on very huge swings like we had in North Shropshire. But you've also got to look at our local election performance. So in this parliament, we've gained 600 councillors, and that shows that we can win in lots of places. We are now running 16 more councils than we were at the start of this parliament.
But what I find interesting, though, is this. It seems to me that there are things you could do to differentiate yourself, particularly from Labour. And they're the sort of things that, Paddy Ashdown with his penny on income tax or education did to get that sort of differentiation, to find the Lib Dems' own space. The trouble is that some of those issues, like, for instance, being more visibly pro-Europe, maybe supporting re-entering the customs union, the single market or whatever, might go down very well in terms of the UK polling numbers, but not necessarily in the seats that you're targeting. There, in a sense, there are two different things that are pulling in different directions.
Well, there are, but we do have a clear strategy on Europe. So, we have set out, I think, a 4-point plan. And what we've got to focus on at the moment is sort of rebuilding our relationship with the EU. We've got to have a much more constructive dialogue than we're having at present. We've got to be more cooperative, and we've got to work forward in stages, fixing things like trying to minimise trade barriers, etc. I mean, ultimately, I think we would like to go down the road of looking at rejoining the single market. We've got to take the country with us on that approach. I think people understand quite fully where we come from as a party, and we are pro-European in our hearts, but we are also a democratic party. We got into a lot of bother at the last general election because people felt we weren't being democratic. You've got to carry people with you on this journey. I think people understand fully where we come from on this issue, but we've got to take an approach that the country is going to be finding acceptable.
You see, the reason I ask this is that we've got not one election coming up, we've got 2 elections coming up. We've got the UK general election, and then there'll be a Senate election. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that the tactics that you're following to appeal to those blue wall seats, as they're called, in the south of England, the southwest of England, aren't necessarily the sort of policies or tactics that would deliver for you in what will become a fully proportional system in Wales. Because at the moment, the polling suggests you'd be just missing out in loads of seats right across Wales, and somehow you need to jack up that basic figure, that core support.
Well, there was a very recent poll, I think came out a couple of weeks ago, which showed that if an election was being held now on the Senate under the current system, with the current makeup, we'd go up to 6 members of the Senate from 1 at the moment. So I'm not sure that's quite true. I think there is a lot of momentum building for us. And I think, there are a lot of issues which do translate across. If we look at things like the campaign, the Liberal Democrats in Westminster have been running against the water companies allowing sewage discharges. Well, that equally applies here in Wales. The Labour government here in the Senate hasn't been holding Dŵr Cymru to account. There were over 1,100 discharges of sewage into the Taff in 2022. This is a problem that we need to deal with here, and this is a problem we also need to take to Labour.
But you see, the point I'm making, Rodney, is this, and the math is quite complex. But more or less, you could say that if you could get up your core support in Wales now up to around about 15%, then you would win a lot of seats under that new system. But you're not quite there. You're close, but you're not quite there. The question I'm trying to ask you is how you get from where you are now to that threshold where you would actually win quite a few seats.
Well, I think, there is a two-staged approach for us. And I think, the focus that the country is on is getting rid of this awful Conservative government and putting something better in place, something that's more responsive, that's more decent, that's a lot less corrupt. And that clearly is what the country is wanting. And that's clearly something we're working on that. Now, the Senate election is going to happen after that election. And there will be different issues then. It will be a different landscape. But, if we go into that election as a much bigger parliamentary force, which I think we can confidently expect to be, I think we will be seen as much more relevant at that Senate election. And I think that will translate into increased support.
Rodney Berman, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your conference in Bournemouth.